Welcome to our second session, in which we will have reflections from Catholic school parents, a religious sister, and a bishop in terms of their understanding and experience of the role of the priest in a Catholic school. We have with us Rick and Vera Huff, who are Catholic school parents. Rick and Vera met at Princeton University, and the rest is history, as they say. They're both converts to the Catholic faith, Vera somewhat later, and in some measure, I think, because her children were already in Catholic school and she was getting associated at a more intimate level with the life of the church and also Catholic school parents. Our second speaker is Sister Maureen McDermott, Immaculate Heart Sister from the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. She's recently been appointed the superintendent for Catholic secondary schools in the Archdiocese. In her career, she's been a teacher, an administrator, and now superintendent. I met Sister some months ago. I was invited to speak to the high school principals of the Archdiocese, and I happened to get there while Sister was doing one of her sessions. And let me say that when I saw her in action, I said, I want to get to know that lady. She's an RN, a real nun.
Thank you.
And she really, I think, has an awful lot to offer, and I think you'll see that. And last but not least, your fathers have already met Bishop Arthur Kennedy, Auxiliary Bishop of the Archdiocese of Boston, who himself is a lifelong Catholic educator. So first, since we're told by the church that parents are the primary educators of their children, let's hear from Rick and Vera.
Thank you much, Father. And thank you for your devotion to Catholic education, but also for your own spiritual guidance and help to my family as we've journeyed through Catholic schools in our own Catholic lives. I'm going to start to talk about my own experience that led me to Catholic education for my children. And I will conclude with some recommendations, perhaps admonitions for those involved in Catholic schooling from a parent's perspective and what we were seeking in educating our own children. And then I will leave it to the real intellect of our family, an artist, and yes, you are. Reflections from perhaps a better maternal view of what Catholic education has meant for our family and for our children. So to start, my own journey with Catholic education really began with reading in the 1980s, long before I had children, probably 15 years before I had children, when I was about 12 or 13. And I was a Boy Scout in Corpus Christi, Texas. Admittedly, that was Latin for a phrase I didn't understand. I was a Protestant. I'd moved from New England to Corpus Christi. And the Mexican influence on that culture and the Catholic culture was completely foreign to me, given where my family was from and where I was from. However, I had joined a Catholic Boy Scout troop that was sponsored by St. Pius X school in Corpus Christi. And I was immediately taken with the culture that surrounded that troop, which was fed primarily by the Catholic school. And it was remarkably distinct from my own education at a parochial school for the Episcopal culture. Excellent. I enjoyed it very much. It was quite spiritual. I got a very solid religious education there. But there was something different about this Catholic school that I think only now as an adult looking back that I can appreciate how the Catholic faith and what they were trying to build in terms of a community of faith was very distinct and different from what I was experiencing in a kind of more meritocratic, somewhat secular, high-achieving, yet somewhat religious Episcopalian school. What that led to was an open-mindedness to my own intellectual formation and what I might learn in reading history and literature. And what I found as I matured was that I had to come face to face with Western culture and civilization, which is really a story of the church, as we all know. And I had to either embrace it or reject it, or come to terms with it in some way, in an integrated way, if I was going to be an intellectually consistent person. It was radically different from what we might think of as a Whig view of history, a constant progressive improvement of man in a secular way. Human nature has never changed in the Catholic Church, and we all have needs and desires and spiritual understandings that's dramatically different than what you learn in a different kind of intellectual setting. So I started to understand what it might be to be a full person, to have a fully integrated intellectual understanding of the world and where we're from, and what that means for us as children of God. And that led me to a real evaluation on what it meant to be educated, as well as what it meant to be a Christian. I also became aware that if I were to be a parent, what that might mean for my own family, and how I wanted my children to be educated about the world and about themselves and about their relationship with God. And that really starts with a great helpmate, and I found one in my beautiful wife, Vera. And I thought very hard about marriage and what it might mean before we were married. I think Vera will touch on this a bit in her own talk, but I had the great luxury and pleasure of a brilliant mentor as a priest when I was an undergraduate in college. Even though I was not Catholic, we became very good friends. And he really helped me think about what marriage was about, what I would want as a father. And although I was not Catholic, I took it very seriously. It seemed to be very wise advice. And so I took marriage preparation very seriously. What that meant was that I took marriage preparation in the Presbyterian Church, which Vera was Presbyterian, and where we were married. But there was one very simple question that I was asked, and we both had to fill this out on a form separately for discussion. And it was a question that I would think Catholic priests, not having been through pre-Cana, must ask as well. But if it's done right, it's incredible the path that it led me on, because it led to an incredibly incisive moment of reflection. And the question was, how was I going to raise my children? It's a simple question, but a profound one. And so here I am, the Episcopalian, and my wife, the Presbyterian. And so I wrote, well, this I guess is the moment of truth. I wrote Catholic. Needless to say, it was a rather interesting discussion with this gentleman. I wish you could have been there. And I wonder sometimes if Vera wished she were not there at that moment. As priests, you might consider how the promotion of Catholic education actually, in many respects, begins long before children arrive. Before you have parishioners to speak to about the sponsorship of your own parish church and the importance of supporting, of the community supporting Catholic education. I would say that part of the evangelization of our faith and Catholic education begins even before marriage. It certainly did for me. And that's a great moment and an opportunity to discuss it, especially in an age when many Catholics have come to terms with accepting secular public education. And in many respects, I would recommend to you to kind of assume in talking to married couples that they would be strongly considering a Catholic education, and that is what would be best for their children as you're preparing them for marriage. So fast forward about less than a year later, we were married in 1994. And in the spring of 1995, we learned we were expecting our first child. And I remembered, of course, how I had answered how I was going to raise our children. I was not yet Catholic. And of course, we knew there would be an impending baptism with the birth of this child. And so I decided if someone was going to raise this child Catholic, maybe one of us should become Catholic. And so with that, I found my other helpmate in the education of my children, and that was the Catholic Church. So I went through formation, and I was baptized that spring with John Fisher as my confirmation name, and our family's patron saint is Thomas More. I think you'll see the importance of that related to Catholic education a bit later as I go through my remarks. But that too had a profound influence on how I view Catholic education, or we view Catholic education. As you know, parents can't do it alone. And we as married couples and families are not atomistic beings self-actualizing without society, or rebuilding and building on what has gone before in a culture. And we knew Catholic schools would be there to pick up where we were not able to, or where we had to leave off as the first educators of our children, and would cooperate with us in the intentions of our children to raise them in the faith as the first teachers of our children. And we knew that we would need not just an institution, but a community and a culture around it if we were going to develop our children in the way that I thought was intellectually integrated with their spiritual life. So that's intellectual, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual. And of course, as Catholic educationists, there's nothing new about what I'm telling you, only to emphasize that there are parents like us who know this and actively seek it out against what the prevailing culture is offering as a partner. But essential to it is culture and the institution, because the church is not just a random collection of people coming together for Mass. It is a community, and it's a community with many attributes that we love. And I wanted my children to feel that love in an institutional setting. And the tenor of that community is going to define for them whether or not they love the church and the institution or reject it. That experience is going to be profound. And if their experience is only Sunday Mass, and that's a fairly miserable one, their spiritual life is going to reflect that. And likewise, if it's a beautiful, wonderful one, it will. And you build on it from there with a Catholic education. And if it's a beautiful and well-formed one, et cetera, et cetera. The reason I think the community is so important, and why I emphasize that early and now in my later remarks, is that the mission of the church, even to Catholic families, is really an evangelical one. And I would submit that many of the families that we are experiencing Catholic education with don't fully or necessarily embrace the intellectual values that I brought to the table and explained to you early in the talk. But they have a sense, a cultural sense of what they want for the children. In some cases, it's a bit misplaced. They think it's a better place because there's more discipline, something very simple like that, or it's safer. But that's fine. Or it's slightly removed from the rest of the culture. But I don't think they necessarily appreciate how countercultural Catholic education really can be, and what it can do in its full abundance for their family. And even though they may be Catholics, obviously we have a wide diversity of families who attend Catholic schools. I would argue the evangelical mission, which would include children who have families who fully want them evangelized in the Catholic faith, includes those who are merely there to get along and think it's a fairly benign and better alternative to public schools. The mission of the Catholic schools in building a community as much is to evangelize them and their families as anybody else. And that's why I mentioned Thomas More and John Fisher. They were in a society that very easily slid along in profound mistakes and breaking with Rome, and terrible things that, of course, befell England at that time, paying for it with their own lives. And the vast majority of people who are very well-meaning and good people trying to do the right things by their children are on that same slide. And I would argue that many Catholic schools, I don't think, take quite so seriously the evangelical mission and the countercultural mission of the parish community that they're building as they should, in a positive way. I'm not referring to this in a negative way, even though the word counter is a negative word. I'm talking about a positive building up of the community. So with that, I wanted to leave you with a couple of thoughts with regards to a Catholic community within the institutional church that combats and deals with what is often a lukewarm reaction to Catholic education, even among those who are partaking of it. And there are two profound reasons for it. One is evangelical, as I mentioned. But the second is much more secular. It's a market differentiator for Catholic schools to be profoundly spiritually Catholic and building true Catholic communities. After all, if they're only slightly safer or only a little better at teaching algebra, or may have the occasional class, that's enough of a marker against public schools. And it's certainly not enough of a marker against public schools in good school districts. And I would argue or encourage you, if you are already doing a few of the things I'm going to mention, to double down on them. And if you're not, to have the courage to do so, because families like ours are seeking it. And I think it will create a much broader market for your schools, an appeal for your schools, in addition to be more spiritually powerful for the families who attend them. The first is, in creating an authentic Catholic community, is to suffuse all subjects with the Catholic faith, every single one of them. Calculus and the beauty of calculus, physics, to physical education in the care of our bodies in the image of God, to obviously theology and religion. Secondly, and this means great literature, the best art in the Western tradition, a Socratic method of teaching, of critical thinking. It means great writing. Schools are terrible at teaching writing, awful at expressing ourselves. And if we want really good Catholics, we want really good people who can argue and write and hold their own in our culture. Secondly would be the practice of our Catholic faith in terms of how we deal with parents and our students and how the faculty relate to one another. I think this is a real struggle for many schools. And I think it's a struggle for one of the schools my own child attended. It cannot be just lip service how we live out the gospel and talk about the Catholic values of the school. They really must be present when there's a discipline problem. How is that dealt with in a way that is consistent with God's mercy and is corrective in a teaching moment, provides help, builds somebody up, and moves them forward? How is it that we deal with relations that are so often a difficulty in public schools when it comes to materialism and comparative circumstances? How is it that teachers themselves are living out the magisterial mission of the church and understanding their role as teachers to transmit the gospel? Are they merely teachers who are looking for a position that they couldn't get in the public schools? Or did they come out of the public schools with a pension and this is a nice buffer? Or do they really buy into the mission of the church and what you're trying to accomplish in your parish schools? How is it that you come together as a community? And this, of course, comes to the liturgy. Is it weekly, or is it just the occasional holiday? Is there regular penance? Are families invited to participate in school liturgies on regular occasions? Is it beautiful? So often, it's quite odd. I'll go to a parish, and it's a stunning liturgy. And I'll go to the school, and it is the most mediocre thing I've ever experienced. And the interesting thing, whether you're talking about the children psychologically, as I mentioned, in terms of the atmosphere of school, or the liturgy, is that children are probably the most insightful and receptive critics of beauty and of fairness of anybody will ever encounter. As we get older, we get cynical, we get used to things. But great art and music and preaching speaks to young people profoundly. They are not on a different plane from the rest of us, I would argue. And I hear this time and time again from my own children. And I've seen what's moved them. Whether that's on the liturgy or whether it's how fairness is treated. They have just an incredibly innate sense of justice. So the liturgy has to be integral, and I would argue the more the better. Do the classes start with prayer, or is it just the beginning of the school day? I'm just throwing out a few examples of how liturgical life can infuse the life of the school and combine with the community. Finally, religious education. It's taken for granted that that's one reason people are at Catholic schools. However, I would argue that the variability there and consistency and the quality is something that really needs to be tackled in Catholic schools. And I go back again to the sophistication of children. What is harder to answer? Adults' theological questions or children's about where they came from? Who is God? What is he? What is heaven like? How do we get there? Right? What does God do to bad people? Why does God allow evil? I mean, the hardest theological questions for us to answer. They instantly want to understand and discuss. And it's not enough to run children through a repetition of just understanding what the seven sacraments are. They are prepared with great moral imaginations and imaginations of literature and storytelling. That's what they're attracted to instantly, that the gospel can speak to them in very profound ways, and in ways that I would argue religion is very prepared to discuss with them if it is top-notch. With that, and those four encouraging things I'd like to see in Catholic schools and why my children are there, but also what I think is sometimes lacking. I'll turn it over to Vera.
Well, that was pretty lightweight, honey, so 28 years ago, Rick and I were both freshmen at Princeton University, as Father already mentioned. And in his first week on campus, Rick caught sight of a priest in a cassock walking across the courtyard, and it captured his imagination. He was an Episcopalian, as he mentioned, but had a Catholic roommate, which he didn't mention, who I think was very instrumental in this whole process.
And a Catholic school graduate.
And a Catholic school graduate, and their room got a call from that priest, who was the chaplain. So that priest in his cassock walking across Maddie Courtyard in Princeton University arguably led to Rick's conversion, my conversion, possibly our marriage because of the kind of thinking that you were doing, and the birth and baptism of our children. And I met Rick the same week, and he talks way more about Father McCloskey and that cassock than he does about meeting me the first time. That was 28 years ago. 15 years ago, I enrolled our oldest child in Catholic school. And since then, 3 of my children have logged a combined total of 40 years in Catholic schools. And I've had every possible job in the PTA. Recording secretary, retreat organizer, kindergarten lunch aide, newsletter editor, flyer czar. We live in my hometown in New Jersey, and my children are the 5th generation of my family to live there. It's an idyllic place, right? Mm-hmm. Quiet, pretty, affluent, and it has good schools. So everywhere we go, people ask me, why do you send your children to Catholic school when Little Silver schools are so good?
Right. Why pay more?
And my joke answer is, they're too good. They're full of students and parents who think the world owes them a living. And this is an old story that I keep trotting out, and I need to find a new one, but I happen to know of a mother who went into a conference with her daughter's algebra teacher and said, she doesn't need to learn math. She's just going to grow up and marry a rich man like I did. So that's the kind of materialism, snobbishness that you find in a good school. And I often think that good schools all over the country are full of people whose parents are educated and affluent and are providing them, filling in the education the school isn't necessarily providing. And they're starting off with an advantage. So my children went to school with the children not just of bankers and lawyers and engineers, but also the children of painters, nurses, and janitors who were making real sacrifices to pay the tuition and send their children to Catholic school. It's counterintuitive. Whenever I tell people I paid tuition for my children to go to a more diverse school, they look dubious, but it's true. And I think it was really beneficial to them. It gives them perspective and compassion. And as Rick suggested, not every family is wholeheartedly committed to the Catholic culture of the school, but it gets you a little closer. There is morning prayer to remind you where you are, letters from the principal, and that tuition bill reminds you on a regular basis that you are doing something different that you have to recommit to moment by moment, certainly year by year. My other joke is that the best thing about Catholic school is no CCD. But it's a good joke because it has an important truth behind it, which is we want our children's faith to be an inextricable part of their education, not a Sunday morning part of their education, not a Thursday afternoon part of their education, but an every day, every class, every moment, playground part of their education. But when Father asked me to speak about the role of the priest in today's Catholic school, and I tried to start brainstorming about it, I had some trouble thinking of school-based examples of priests on the ground doing things that I could talk about and recommend to you. Our parish school, the elementary school, has had a lot of great chapels, a lot of newly ordained priests, so it's baptism by fire. And we have one great administrator who is so good, and I know he's good because nothing bad ever happens. He must be doing a great job. But I could wish that they had been a bigger and more visible part of our children's lives on a day-to-day basis. So that's why the first thing I thought of was the priest Rick spotted in the courtyard. And then I thought about this. 8 years ago this fall, our youngest son, our fourth, was a newborn, and he was fighting for his life in the NICU at Jersey Shore Medical Center. None of our parish priests and no hospital chaplain came to the bedside. And that was partly our fault. We didn't ask, but we were paralyzed by grief. We were overwhelmed. We were sleep deprived and just devastated. But we have a dear friend, Rabbi Jonathan Roos, who came to the hospital to see us. And he asked our permission to pray the Mishiberach over Thomas. He said, I feel sure that Jesus said this prayer. And we said, yes, yes. So we all joined hands by the isolette, and Jonathan intoned the prayer. And the nurses were so confused because they had helped me baptize Thomas over a sink in the NICU the day before. That's your rabbi. So this is a phenomenon. The priest walking across the courtyard, our rabbi, that I call the unexpected priest. Over the next 2 days, you're hearing from actual experts about pastoral care and pedagogy and governance. I don't need to tell you about that. But my expertise is as a mother and as a Catholic woman who's still developing in her faith. We are, as Father said when he introduced us, are our children's first teachers, and we provide Catholic education. And some of the most meaningful pastoral moments in our lives are unexpected, with a priest who isn't our priest, who's found in an unexpected place or has an unexpected message. So how can you make yourselves unexpected priests? By emulating Christ, especially the Christ of the post-resurrection Gospels. Every year after Easter, I remember again how powerful and beautiful those stories are. They're my favorites. We're so forgetful, we fall so easily into despair, and we fail to recognize Christ in our midst, but he makes himself present and familiar and authentic and inspires us. I did what everybody does now. When I was preparing this talk, I went on Facebook and said, give me some ideas about priests and how they're involved in Catholic education. So one friend of a friend responded, our parish priest gets his lunch from the school lunchroom every few days and sits down with the kids and eats with them. As a result of these micro interactions he makes time for throughout his day, the kids consider him approachable and will go up to him and ask him a million questions. So reading this, I immediately thought of Jesus on the seashore cooking fish over the fire. Come and have breakfast. Now none of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. And similarly, after the encounter on the road to Emmaus, it was only in the breaking of the bread that they knew him. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? We've been taught to recognize this bread breaking as a metaphor for the Eucharist. But the humble breaking of bread at physical meals has its own power. And having Christ or his representative at our everyday table not only sanctifies the domestic routine, but it also humanizes the divine presence. Father Stravinskas told me a story last year about dining with a family. As he sat in the living room, their 4-year-old plunked himself down and said, "You're God."
I said he was right.
So in the school environment, you're wrestling with these bureaucratic problems and feeling probably uncomfortably aware of your humanity, but the students are conscious of you in persona Christi. And breaking bread or bouncing a basketball can help us recognize the priest who is companion and teacher and counselor. But if you're not the basketball bouncing type, don't try it. Because the next essential element of the unexpected priest is authenticity. And Rick alluded to this too. Children can spot insincerity from a mile away. My son Thomas, over whom our rabbi prayed almost 8 years ago, is blind and cannot walk or talk, but he can tell a competent caregiver from an incompetent one in 5 minutes, and he will let them and us know.
And now that he's older, he screams at bad liturgy.
It's true.
It's true. It's
I,
really funny. It's bizarre.
Took him back to a parish that we have essentially abandoned because it was a 5:30 mass and we needed to go, and they were singing this terrible dirge-like duet of Hagen and Haas number, and he was so upset that we had to leave. Yes. So not long after we began to attend our current parish.
At home, we call it his musical dictatorship.
Yes.
He likes the Beatles, for example, and the Beach Boys.
He has good taste.
Right.
Yes.
But we should
And-
now
and
refer to
Bach.
his liturgical dictatorship at church. He likes Bach, yes.
So not long after we began to attend our current parish, the pastor delivered a homily in which he mentioned that when he was in high school, his hair was dyed blue. And our daughter was enchanted. At that time, her hair was jet black, growing out, half blonde and half black. It's now purple at the ends for the second time. But that feeling of connection with him was very important to her and helped tie all of us to him and to the parish, and it made her more likely to listen to attention to any homily he gives. They're not all about blue hair. Just that one was about blue hair, even when there are hard sayings. But it wouldn't have worked if it hadn't been true and a true point of connection. And I'll go off script here to say, that daughter, as you might judge from the fact that the end of her hair is purple, is our most challenging child. And she's had another unexpected priest in her life who is not a priest, who is the music teacher at her high school, which she just graduated from. Religion classes at that high school were pretty thin gruel, and she really craved more. In general, the school was disappointing and a difficult experience for her, but being in the choir, hearing the liturgy that teacher, who is also the minister of music at our parish, chooses, and getting to know him certainly salvaged her education and may have saved her. I'm not sure that's an exaggeration to say. He is Christ-like in his loving and forgiving, but high standard that he applies to students. So that's an unexpected priest that I didn't even think of until we were sitting here and talking about it. So I mentioned hard sayings, and the last piece of being the unexpected priest is probably the hardest, which is inspiring others with your integrity and always serving the truth. If you want your listeners' hearts to burn within them, you have to be faithful to the magisterium. And students and parents don't like that, or at least at the time. There's a lot of grumbling in Catholic schools. I know this. I've been around it for a really long time, especially in such a secularized culture. But one of my other Facebook collaborators on this speech observed, who was a greater unexpected priest than St. Paul, pastor of nowhere, evangelist of everywhere, compelled by Christ and his truth to turn his life upside down. He spent the rest of his life as a fugitive and ended it as a martyr. So the priest in today's Catholic school should be able to endure not only grumbles, but even angry phone calls and meetings of concerned parents, if he has the courage of his own and the church's convictions. And at this point, I give you permission to seek me at the break and make light of all of my problems. You may never fully know the fruits of your labor as an unexpected priest, but it is still worth walking through the vineyard. Be present and familiar in the cafeteria, the gymnasium, the library, the parking lot. Be yourself. Be ecumenical, but always faithful. By doing all these things, you may not only nourish your school community, but also lighten heavy loads, convert hearts, and foster healthy, happy Christian families.
I think I can see everyone except Father Keene.
What do you need to see?
There you are, absolutely the friendly face of the crowd. Good evening. I'm Sister Maureen McDermott, and I have a new assignment starting October 5th of this past school year. I'm the new superintendent of secondary schools for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. The three things I'd like to tell you about myself before I begin is that I'm a Philadelphia lifer of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. So Catholic education to me is like the air I breathe. This is the Archdiocese of St. John Neumann. The religious were brought from everywhere in the United States to have the Archdiocese of Philadelphia thrive, to raise up a class of Catholics to be literate. So this archdiocese is a blessed archdiocese in Catholic education. And one of the founders of my community, and that's the second point, I'm a sister servant of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and we are educators first and last. Whether it is as a DRE or a high school, elementary school principal, our schools in Chile and Peru, and throughout the eastern seaboard of the United States, Catholic education for us is like the air we breathe. And so there isn't any thought as a sister servant of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, but that Catholic education is of, a priceless value. So I believe in graced moments. And this is a grace moment tonight. I surely never met Father Peter before this winter, and it's through the happenstance of being in the superintendent's office that he called me and asked me to come. But listening to this wonderful couple talk about Catholic education was so re-inspiring to me and a grace moment. But let me tell you my other grace moment. So you probably did see me and didn't know me. How many of you watched the Holy Father as he came to different parts of New York, Washington, Philadelphia this fall? How many? Could you? I'm a teacher. You have to participate. Right? Did you see him? How many saw him get off the plane in Philadelphia? I have a few. So when the Holy Father stepped off the plane in Philadelphia, he stepped off the plane to a high school band playing. And it was the high school band where I served for the past 15 years as principal. And when I say it was a graced moment, I'll tell you a very quick story that I really hadn't intended, is nowhere in my notes, but it applies to this evening and graced moments. And so Bishop Shanahan hadn't had a marching band since 1970. But when I came as principal, in the year 2000, it was a big dream of mine, and I kept saying it to the president, I would just love a marching band. And the president would say, I don't think we can afford that. I don't think we can, and through the years, we improved this or improved that or improved the technology or improved, but it was never the marching band. But finally, through a whole series of things, including some grant writing, we were able to get band coats that were $200 a piece and band hats that were $40. You get the picture. And there were about 100 students in the band. We have a wonderful band director. He's extremely musical. So when we heard the Holy Father was coming, I couldn't imagine in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia that loves its students, that students wouldn't somehow be involved. And all year long, I pestered the Office of Catholic Education. Now I'm the one being pestered. And the pestering was, how will the students be? Well, sister, it is a world meeting of families, not at the Archdiocese. So probably there won't be, specific schools involved. Okay, so I would ask again, nothing. July, now remember the Holy Father's coming in September, and I get a call from one of the lay leaders in the Archdiocese, and she said to me, sister, it's going to be a quiet entrance of the Holy Father, but now we think it's too quiet. So what would you think if the Bishop Shanahan High School Band greeted this is what I was waiting for. This was it. So I asked our band director, and when I spoke to him, he was so stunned, he went into his office, he didn't say a word. And then I got a note that popped up, and it said, I was too stunned to speak. So a series of things happened, that songs were picked and so on. But let me tell you about our band director. Our band director has 3 adopted children. There's no children of his own, 3 adopted. One is 13, and twin boys who are 10. When the twin boys were going to be born, the couple, Chuck and Kristen Keating, were told that these children would be severely disabled. And did they still wish to go through with the adoption? And they said yes. And they went to Texas, and they brought the boys home. Christopher, it has some minor differences, but not much. But Michael is severely disabled. So if you saw this, and the president of the high school that I just left is bilingual because she served in South America for 25 years. So she kept saying to me, we had no idea how the morning would go at the airport. If I get to say anything, I'm going to say in Spanish. And she said it, Holy Father, please bless us. So she was all ready with her Spanish. And the Holy Father came down the steps. And they said, he's here. Here are these 100 band members. He's here. And he got in his Fiat, and the Fiat went, and the kids played. And the Fiat went this way. And I said, well, I guess that's it. And then the Fiat turned. And he came alongside the band, and he said, play. But Sister Regina caught his eye, and she went like this and pointed to Michael, the handicapped boy. And of course, we've seen what the Holy Father does. And opening the door while it was still running, he said, stop, in Spanish. And he came over. Now, the Holy Father in the United States had his wingman, right? He had Monsignor Mark Miles, who was the translator, and Monsignor leaned in. But Sister Regina, ready in Spanish, said, "Holy Father, here is one of your children." And the compelling piece was the Holy Father leaned down and kissed Michael, and then blessed Sister Regina and myself, but leaned down and kissed Michael. And that picture went viral. Dubai, the London Times, the Washington Post. But the most interesting piece of all of this, that blessing, was when it went to the Washington Post came to the Keatings home in Chester County, and they interviewed them, and they ran what it was like to have a severely disabled child. And based on that, an anonymous donor paid the Keatings mortgage. Now, what I didn't know was the Keatings had been suffering very difficult financial times because of teachers. So there are no happenstances. There are graced moments. And tonight is one of those graced moments. And here I am, the newest superintendent, and an opportunity to speak about priests in Catholic education. And there are a couple things I want to say to you, fathers. First of all, the Holy Father says the teachers of the faith have to get out of their caves. Now, he's not speaking to you. He's speaking to me and you and all of us. And so that might mean out of the rectory. For the principal, it means out of your office. And for the superintendent, it means out of the Office of Catholic Education, right? And he's calling us to that, to be teachers of the faith. And so I thought about priests in Catholic school. And then I thought about this kind of little message. We see the commercial, the cost of a uniform, $50. The cost of, the notebook and the pencils, and $25. The cost of having a priest, or the value added of having a priest in a school, is priceless. I have been in a school, Villa Maria Academy, where they did not have a priest on the campus, but rather the priest was at another school and came once a month to say Mass. And you would say, and we had religious sisters of our congregation. It was a thoroughly Catholic school, but I can tell you the extreme difference I felt when there wasn't a priest present on the campus. And this is what it looked like. First of all, I would use the word priceless, and I would say the P is the presence. One day on the Feast of Corpus Christi, and Father and I have something in common, we're Fordham grads. I was on my way home from Fordham, and it was Corpus Christi, and it was a Saturday night, and I was in Norristown, coming out off of 202, and I thought, I'm going to stop for Mass right here. I had never stopped at that parish before, and the priest was speaking about Corpus Christi, and it was the most beautiful homily I have heard, and he said, in the absence of words, presence is the best way to show love, and that the Eucharist does that in such a profound way. Eucharist is there. It's there all the time, completely available. And so I would say your presence is being Eucharist. The R is the opportunity for you to constantly reflect on the value that you give, that added value that was spoken about, that not financial value, but the value to your school community. And in this counterculture, this cultural time, most people will say, either we're anachronistic, we're anachronisms, we're out of sync, out of time with the culture. We're definitely uncool, right? And maybe we don't even belong. But I say to you that your presence and reflecting on that is important. The I would use for the opportunities for you to invite. I come from a high school where there are 10 young men in the seminary, right? Newly ordained this year, newly ordained 2 years ago, and one before that, because the school ministers who have been and the priests who have been in that high school will invite the young boys to think about that they are called. And so if you don't invite, you aren't planting the seed. And your Catholic schools give you that opportunity. You cannot go into a public school and say, think about being a priest. And it's really hard to say that when you're giving a homily to 600 people on a Sunday or 500 people. But one-on-one in a very, very personal way, you in a school community, and you can invite in an ongoing and personal way. And you can invite your diocesan vocation director into your school to start to have a relationship with a 7th grader or an 8th grader or a junior or a senior. If you don't do that, what's the other option? The other option is not an option, right? You are here to catechize, and our students need that every day in every way. And they've always needed it. I don't know about you, Father, but I'm a child of Vatican II. Oh my. The religion classes that I came from talk about thin. They were so thin because right after Vatican II, things went the extreme other way. Jesus' love was like a small warm puppy, capital J, sing a song, light a candle. It was very thin. And so when I was a novice and someone broke something, the novice directress asked us what commandment we broke. Well, can I tell you? We were all over the place, right from the 2nd to the 10th. And so sure enough, there was a meeting of all the directresses, and what they decided was we need a catechetics class ASAP because our understanding of it was thin. And I suspect it was everyone who went to high school in the 70s, right? It was a most unusual evangelization. Some of our high schools have a large population of non-Catholics. And the newest population of non-Catholics are international students who are coming into the high schools. We've had converts. We've had converts at our high school. And it's just simply wonderful. Having experienced beautiful liturgy in an ongoing way, having experienced the call of who is my brother and who is my sister, that as Catholics we have a social responsibility, that we have a great calling, and that teenagers particularly have noble hearts, and they expect and want to do great things. And they count on us, you and me, seeing that in them. They have great noble hearts, and they want to do great things. They don't think they're growing up to be ordinary. And they know that even if it's a small task, it could have the possibility of the extraordinary. And then I would say to you, the L is learn and listen from the culture. You have to respond to it. You have to respond to it in a kind way, but you have to respond to it with clarity of where the moral compass is. Because students don't know, and it's very fuzzy and gray for them. And they need that moral compass every day. And then I would say the E is make the Eucharist the exemplum in every way. And then finally, and this is what I saw in that campus where we were very Catholic, but no priest in the study, the sacramental life was thin. You provide that sacramental life every day in Mass and confessions, in opportunities for anointing. Every time, and you know, school communities are ecosystems. And you're the spirituality that and I can do, you know, the religious and the lay people can do so much, but there's a limit to what we can do. And so, you know, whenever somebody's sick and in the hospital, while I'd like to go and visit, the first person I go to is our priest, and I say, please go visit, because I know there'll be an anointing, and there may be a need for confession. So the other things I'd like to say to you is this. There are challenges. And that's the biggest piece, that the priests and the religious put up the challenges. Now, how many of you have heard Sister Claire Fitzgerald? She's a unique sister of Notre Dame. She's about 94, but she's still on the road speaking. And one of the, I was at a law symposium, the Catholic Schools Law Symposium, a number of years ago, and I heard her take on the multiplication of the loaves and the fish in the modern day view. And she said, you know, Jesus looks out at this big crowd and he asks his bursar, his business manager, well, what do we have? Well, Lord, we've got this few loaves and this few fish. And the answer is not enough. And Sister Claire said, put the not enough in anything you want to say. Not enough personnel. Not enough money. Not enough resources. Not enough members of the parish in the pew to make this thing a go. And then Sister Claire said, and then Jesus said, and put these loaves and fish in my hands. Give them to me. And the blessing and the multiplication takes place. And so it calls for a trusting. The other part is we get tired, right? Jesus came away and he brought his apostles, the disciples, away. But the two things I would say to you is time. One time we were, you know, and we were young, we were junior professors, and we had this Father John Hemrow. Oh, Father, we're so tired. How do you get time to say all your prayers? This is so much religious life. Oh, it's exhausting. And he said, Father John said, time is all you have, and it's all you have to give. So yes, going over to the school, being part of the children's lives costs, and it costs time, your personal investment of time. But it is what you have to give at the end. You know, on that last day when we go, we want to make sure that we have given it all. And it's exhausting. So we give our time and it will exhaust us. But we're supposed to be that candle that burns out, right? And then when we do that, grace comes alive. And this is a graced moment. The other challenges are the sensibilities for this 21st century, which are a huge challenge to us. And the first one I would say is sexuality. That's a big challenge. And trying to be sensitive, but teaching the truth. And the transgender issues and teaching the truth. And it is a hard road because the government is saying they're against it, you know, they're making it very hard. So teaching the truth to the children, because many times children who are suffering with transgender issues, there's an issue deeper than that they're struggling with. And then the diminishment of vocations. That's the other challenge that we have. And finally, the challenge, of course, for the finances for the school. And so we have to fight for the voucher everywhere we are. Pennsylvania has something called the EITC, the Educational Tax Credit, and just recently it was increased again in the millions. Catholics are a powerful force. But sometimes we think in the marketplace we have to apologize for being Catholics, for a call to religious life or priesthood. And yes, we do have to say to people, trust us, and trust us again, and trust us again. But did Jesus have any fewer challenges in his own hometown? Sometimes by his own apostles. And then to this wonderful couple, in responding to them, I heard them say, and having genuinely Catholic teachers, so I would challenge you, Father, pastors, to make sure in intentional hiring, and I raised my voice, in intentional hiring, you hire people who live their faith. Most recently, we were hiring for new presidents and new principals. I called every pastor. And I think I floored the people, my colleagues. Sister, aren't you going a little too far? I said, I don't think so. because I'm going to trust the school leadership, the spiritual leadership to these people. So I didn't ask if Father would write a letter of recommendation, because poor Father's nervous about that. I said, is this person an active member of your, I even say in interviews, will your pastor know you if I ask your name?
Yeah.
Be intentional. And then know that, and we've heard this tonight, parents have been intentional when they have selected a Catholic school. Yes, there are good public schools, but in good public schools, you have some very unintentional parents. They sign their kid up because it's the law, right? But in Catholic school, they not only have to say, I will do this, they have to say, I will pay for this, and I will volunteer X amount of time. And, you know, I may not agree with everything this church is teaching, but I have to, in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, they have to sign that they will accept the teachings of the church. So it is a very big darn deal. But the alternative is something we can't live with, because here's our calling. Our calling, parents, the bishop, the priests, the religious, the Catholic schools, is to prepare Catholic leaders for the marketplace. And without Catholic leaders for the marketplace, we are in a very different place. In our legal system, in our government, and in our hospitals. We had a Catholic, you know, who was the center of this first talk? St. Thomas More, a Catholic leader in the marketplace. Well, it didn't go well for him. Nobody's remembered throughout history as being the person who spoke for morality, right? And spoke for making the right decision no matter what. And that's what we are really doing every day in school. We are preparing Catholic leaders for the marketplace. Because eventually, and we're governed not only by the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, but by a management group called Faith in the Future. And so I've said to Faith in the Future, you know, the alternative of not teaching students well when we're middle-aged already is not good. If we don't teach them to read, and then they come to be my nurse or my doctor, good night, sister, well, it's the same in preparing them in the faith. We need them to be at the core of their center, moral, global stewards, that they understand their calling. And it's a great call. It's a deep calling. And how rich and lucky we are, and how blessed in this grace moment to know that we are in a very small way part of this journey for them. And I don't think we could ask for a better moment, or a better moment in time to be part of this journey in Catholic education. So even though when Father called me, I have to say, I went, all right, Father, I'll come. The reflection really re-energized me. So I thank you for this grace moment with you this evening.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be part of the board here this evening. And you've heard many, many important things, and I'm not going to repeat all of the things that you've learned, and many of them are very important insights into the way in which the role of the priest within the framework of a parish school, and beyond the parish school, also even in regional high schools and so forth, is compelling in terms of the way in which the presence of the priest is so crucial for the mediation and for the invitation to young people to, in the various stages of their unfolding, to be able to gradually undertake the appropriations proper to their own levels. And we talk about this whole matter of children go from grade to grade to grade, which means that there are these little stages of fulfillment that they are called upon to realize. And they are called upon to do this in a whole variety of different subjects. And the importance of the relationship of the integration, as we've heard, of the importance of faith that Rich was talking about, the way in which faith needs to be integrated into all of the disciplines, is something that can be a thing that you are able to help people to understand, particularly teachers and also principals, because there's something that the bishops are very concerned about, and that is, as Father Peter has told us in his presentation this evening, the USCCB has had, and the previous bishops' conferences and so forth, have had an enormous important insight into education as the way in which the Church in the United States was going to find a footstep to be able to evangelize. And this goes back to his many manifestations of this. I was in the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis, as I told you, for 32 years. Archbishop Ireland was one of the great bishops in the United States who saw that the crucial nature of education and the importance of education in the American Republic lent itself precisely to what a Catholic understanding of human nature, understanding of the relationship of individuals to the cosmos, to the society, to the church, and to the culture actually required. So I think that we have clear that the bishops and as Father Peter was mentioning, the recent popes have made it quite evident to in their responses to the American bishops on their visitations, that they are aware of how this education selection as the important way the church would be present in the United States was a bit of genius. So we have a very, very crucial tradition, and now we are at a very important turning point. And I like to think that we need to be able to consider how this presence that everyone has been speaking about relates to the children in the unfolding of their years, because the presence has to be different. The priest walking across the campus in a cassock at Princeton has a different kind of presence than going to the kindergarten. Right. And yet, those different modes of presence are very, very crucial to be able to identify. And it means also the need to become simple and humble when you're dealing with those early years. But you will find, because I know this from having been in parishes, served in parishes where there were schools and gone over to the schools, and you listen to the way in which children ask questions. Questions are the key to the search. And when they don't have an ability to comprehend or unify the experiences that they have, then the questions really begin to flow. I was talking recently to a young priest who was ordained at the time when I was rector of St. John's Seminary. And he was telling me that he went to visit the schools frequently, and one day the teacher in the 6th grade called him and said to him, "Father, there are 4 6th grade boys who want to know if they can have a conversation with you. So I'm supposed to see if you would allow them to make an appointment." So he said, "Yes, of course they can come." And he said to me, "I was expecting them to come and that they would talk about baseball. But you know what they wanted to talk about?" I said, "Yeah, I think probably so." He said, "Well, I didn't think so." He said, "They wanted to talk about God." And they had all of these questions, and these questions were all written out. These were 6th graders who manifested by their questions the unfolding of what was a concern about their comprehension of the way in which faith related to them as sixth graders. So you couldn't do a major apologetics, but you do have to do a certain kind of, have a certain capacity as the priest to be able to speak about the way in which they have the capacity to meet God. And the very fact that they have a question about God is already a sign of God's working in them. Now, when I was rector, I used to talk to the seminarians about the kind of ways in which the ancients understood education. The Greeks spoke of it as paideia. And paideia is something like the unfolding of a childhood toward an adult. And it goes through these various things that, first of all, you have to learn languages, you have to develop a sophistication in imagination, you begin to get capacities to interrelate things that you never saw related before. And I think one of the things that is important, especially in these early years, is that you try yourself to enter into the way in which children imagine things. I mean, this is why we have seen these wonderful narratives that have been turned into first books, of course, but then movies, about the mystery of evil in relationship to the power, mystery of evil in its effort to destroy good that we see in C.S. Lewis and all of those great British writers, and the way in which children can begin to recognize the fact that the experiences of the mystery of evil is something that the technology and culture can no longer protect them from. And this is even more evident today. And so therefore, the mystery of evil is something that draws children into a way of wondering about themselves and their world. And the priest is a very important mediator of this. And as a practical suggestion, I mean, I talk to people who are in education in Boston and then people who are doing confirmation teaching. That one of the important things is that the very church building itself is filled with images and symbols which are evoking certain feelings, certain expectations, which allow a child to begin to enter into a world in which the imagination, hers and his, are able to unfold. The church itself, you need to help them read the church building. And then you have to help them read the Mass, all of the things that go on in the ritual. Because then you begin to see that this way we can begin to engage one of the most frightening things of the postmodern culture, which is the postmodern culture's intention to destroy all mega-narratives. What are the mega-narratives? In the ancient world of the Greeks, it's the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's the Homeric accounts. It's Virgil and the Aeneid. For the Jews and Christians, it's the Old and New Testament. These are the mega-narratives. And these are the things that are under attack. Because in the postmodern notion, no one is going to tell you what your nature is. You create your own nature. You just simply decide what it is that you're going to become. And so this strange conflict that we're in postmodernity between a loss of an authentic sense of a universal nature and being replaced by a sense of a constant flow of historical events and historical decisions and so forth, makes it very difficult for young people to find access to the true presence of God. And the Catholic schools are faced with an entirely new, set of conditions under which this paideia and this catechesis can continue to go forward. The Catholic schools, as we have heard, are the most important resources for evangelization. And one of the things that the bishops have been very much aware of is that the Catholic schools are the centers where those who are going to become future leaders of the church are already present. And so we need to be very attentive and intensive about the matter of the development of young Catholic leadership. Boy Scouts is, in fact, an interesting way in which that kind of leadership is effective. It's amazing to know how many priests, how many seminarians at the North American College were Eagle Scouts. Leadership becomes a very important way in which we have the capacity to bring people forward so that they are able to see themselves and imagine themselves in situations where they are going to have a role of becoming evangelizers themselves. Vatican II's whole point with the laity was that the laity were to be the evangelizers of culture. And not just in the marketplace, although the interesting data in the marketplace is that the number of CEOs in America who are educated in Catholic grade school is the highest of any group. So the thing of leadership becomes, I think, very important from the beginning. And I see it when I go out for confirmations, for example. I have all the students write me a letter. Why they want to be confirmed. What does it mean to them? Why did they select their confirmation name? Why did they select their sponsor? It's amazing what you learn with these questions. And then, of course, what does the Mass mean to them? And it's amazing how many of them will say, I'm really looking forward to being able to do things in my parish now that I'm being confirmed. They tell you they want to be leaders. So I would put this matter of the schools together with the catechesis that goes on beyond the schools as well. Because once the unfolding and the self-transcendence that takes place in children as a result of their questions arising and their questions being answered and new questions coming forward, this kind of paideia is the way in which God works. And you see it in the way Jesus teaches in the Gospels. He teaches sometimes by parables, in which he reverses the relationship between human intelligence and faith, so that at certain points in time, faith takes the lead over intelligence. And he teaches by simple things of the worry and the people's sense that maybe they're not as good as other people. And so therefore they're afraid to be a part of what Christ is calling them to. But those who have a special gift of the presence of God also have to be trained, and this needs to be done in Catholic schools. You train those who have a special presence of God to be aware that others may not have the same depth or level, but that they are to respect that little light that may be present in another person, because the church, the whole church, is lifting and carrying people forward into the mystery of the redemption by the love of God, of the realities of evil. I would say a few things, just a few last things about the resources. For example, these would be some little things that you could be used that people may not know about. For example, there's a friend of mine who is the director of the Ramsey Institute of Faith and Science at Oxford. And while he's written these amazing books, he has a degree in particle physics and a degree in medieval philosophy and a degree in systematic theology. And he's written these little books one on Apologia, one on Credo, another one on the church's contribution to Western culture. They're little books of about 100 pages, and they're very readable. They're little kind of awakening moments in history to show young people what has it been that the church has done already through the mystery of Christ in uplifting the world and uplifting all kinds of areas of knowledge that nobody even remembers. So those little books are available from the Catholic Truth Society. You can get them. So his name is Father Andrew Pinzent, Pinzent, and you can go on his webpage and you have all the information there. And I think people who teach the sciences would be well engaged in thinking about that. There's a sister that I met by the name of Sullivan. What is her first name? I'll think of it in a minute. She was in San Diego, and she put together originally for the Archdiocese of San Diego, a project in which exactly what Rich was talking about was established. So that she put together from the kindergarten up through the 8th grade, all what would be taught in each grade at each level, and what would be taught in the religion class in those levels. And then she made the connections horizontally of what you could do, how a teacher who is teaching science could talk about something about creation, or talk about something about miracles, or something linking the reality of the Christian life to all of the dimensions of learning. And so that I'll try and make that available to you. I have this friend of mine, David Fleischacker, who has he runs the Lonergan website down in Washington, D.C. And he can make this available for you. And I think it would be a wonderful thing to have for schools and for the people in dioceses who would be able to see the possibilities that could be done. And then how do you get people to be formed so that they can manifest this kind of. Gertrude Sullivan is her name. Gertrude Sullivan. So there are many things. Well, I mean, I think that we have a wealth of materials, we have a wealth of history, and we have God on our side. And we have these new postmodern issues, and they're not going to be easily addressed because the culture has already captured the imagination of the young people. And that is why our first battle is going to be a battle for the imagination of our Catholic youth. So it's a wonderful, wonderful mission. And I think it provides a great capacity to engage in evangelization. And as Sister was saying, to find the resources to be able to show young people the great value in vocational life. There have been a lot of foundations recently who have been giving money to try to get young people to think about having a vocation in life. And I mean, we have it in spades. So I think it's a wonderful, the role of the priest in the schools is absolutely crucial if the new evangelization is going to be as successful as we hope it will be. So God bless you all. And thank you.
Any questions or observations for any of the panelists?
I have a question, and actually, I kind of direct it towards Sister. Sister, you used a beautiful image in your discussion that talked about that idea of we don't have enough of personnel, we don't have enough of this or enough of that to do what we want to do, what we need to do. That's very often something that has been given to me as an answer in my diocese, especially by diocesan administration. So to put it in perspective, I'm vocation director. I am parochial vicar at a parish of 2,800 families with 11 Sunday masses. On a remote part of the diocese, so out on the arm of Cape Cod, I have a parish grammar school with about 220 students. And as vocation director, one of the things that I have asked, at least at the diocesan level, is what can we have as involvement of priests in at least the diocesan Catholic high schools? Because we're already at a situation where there is zero presence of any full-time priest in any of the high schools. And the chaplains that are so-called assigned to these schools are nominal at best, save one of the 5 high schools in the diocese, as far as having any kind of presence there. And when I voiced the concern that, priests, there are priests who want to be there. There are priests who want to do things there. The response and the mantra that keeps getting returned in the face of anyone that asks about it is, well, we just simply don't have enough priests to do that. And I have used the line a few times with superintendents and even with the bishop is, when have we started treating our schools as lesser than our parishes? And why is it the case that, we're ready and willing to send a young newly ordained priest out into a parish and have neglected our schools now? It's 6 years now that they've been without chaplains. So an entire you consider a high school of 4 years, a generation and a half of high schoolers through that have gone through without any kind of presence of a priest. So I guess as someone who works at a diocesan level, my question to you is, what is it that one tries to do to break the ice in that area?
Scripture tells you,
Yeah.
the widow and the judge.
Just keep being persistent.
Scripture tells you,
Yeah.
when a person, I have to tell in my own office, when a person is persistent enough, eventually the judge said, well, he gave it to the widow. Why? Just to be done with them. So that's the first piece. And the second piece is this. Our auxiliary bishop for education and I were speaking most recently about something very serious. And so, I was just coming off of retreat, so I was all, fervor filled. And the retreat priest talked about praying for spiritual clarity. But within that, it is really to couple that, annoyance with annoying God as well. So pounding prayer. 12 years I asked for a marching band. 12 years. 12 years. And it was amazing that on the, shortly after that, then here we are playing for the Holy Father. Now that was a miracle. So don't stop asking and don't stop praying.
I'd like to make an observation as a parent with regards to this, which is the strength of the church is that it's an institutional church. The weakness of the church is that it's an institutional church. And in a professionalized society that more discreetly looks at occupation and not necessarily vocation, there has arisen, I would argue, within the church, institutional separation where it should not exist. So you kind of have this professional educator class, and that's the school. And then the church is over here. And it may not just be the church, the ecclesiastical leadership saying we can't spare. You may be getting pushback from the professional educational side of the institution. Doesn't want those priests meddling in their institution per se. And I don't know if you've worked it from the other side where they are asking for priests. You may find that they're not. I've seen that for sure.
And I think it's also assumed that the schools will be turned over to, a generation of laity, which in many ways is so, but without the
Right.
priest, you have no sacramental life. So most recently in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, we had a phenomenon where a donor was going to pay for each school to send a representative to get a master's degree in education with 75% of the tuition paid. So 17 high schools nominated people. One high school nominated a priest. The other 16 nominated a layperson. I nominated the priest because I wanted to make sure that we have priest leaders who love schools ready as the next generation of school leaders. And I'm not willing to assume that the priests don't care or don't love the schools, or that there just won't be any religious or any. I'm not willing to capitulate on that. So I think that's important too, that they're not, I think there is a culture, and I think it's clearly defined here, that we educate for the marketplace, but not for the eternal marketplace that we're going for.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all very much. And I think we have a good panoply of what the church is here, and in our presenters and in the feedback that we're getting. So, Sister.
I would just like to say one last thing, because that's me.
Yes, Sister.
I would like to thank each one of you signing up for this workshop, not because I had anything to do with the workshop, but because it says volumes of your care of Catholic education. And so in your signing up is the evidence of the care. And so I would like to thank you for that, your love and care of Catholic schools, Catholic education.
Thank you all very much. We will repair to the chapel for Compline, and then Matthew will lead any out-of-towners upstairs to the common room, where we'll have a social and also a video.